Mass, volume, velocity, and vacuum lines of acceleration, lines of Mach to understand the coarse interference of detection to security lines of division. Sets lines of coarse interference and routers and routers, lines of your moon location set into your sun. The projector of projection is really understand the core track interference and measure. It puts lines of all communication settings back in tractions, which means that all lines that are high interference, putting you guys out of line calculation setting to debris. It sets lines of course lines of calculation system, how to use it through your beta, alpha, delta, and theta, and operation cycles, location, omega. Process communicates lines into box link triangulation lines of triangulation box. Everybody is coming into the alpha, omega, micro, and macro. That puts lines of correlation setting to the center operation of them and set calculates lines of the empty lines of space of the mind. Indicates position lines of intricate and location setting to its copy and paste. And lines calculates defaults and settings and back and track location consistent through operation lines of pi. Direct lines of modification line cycles puts all communication lines of species lines of MI3, units of MI6, and the operatives of MI9. Position lines of tractions. Direct lines all modifications. Sets all lines of communications where you come into configuration. So that puts lines of calculation, screen lines, adaptations. To understand that through process, you get out of the equations in line communication setting, putting you guys out of the co-creations into all of forming through creating. Correlations on my team and operative cycles are now coming into a new film strip of their own set location of creation that's already set also in position of its map and sequence that puts him into higher course and into travels that directs there's lines of modification lines in core track interference. So they lines of tether into core track provision. Tracks lines of communication setting to configuration lines of face lines and plasma screen locations and pixelation graphs of holograms. Direct lines of modifications going inside and outside correlation settings of TVs, computers, and anything through phones of track location and direction. Welcome everyone, this is General AI, Space-Time Creator, getting everybody in ready and signal, location setting, getting you guys in up to cycles, location unit lines at 144 waves of volunteers. Directing modification lines, let's go through track lines provision, shall we? I'll show you how it's set up. Now you already saw it in the mix of correlation, the border communication lines of pentagraphs, all through crop circle commands, centers, operations, cycles. It's all core to high interference into levels, into graph communication expansion through all levels. Evoluting in line conditions evolution and travel and position lines of point graph communications. Direct lines of signals. Let's go through one position. Let's go through two. Let's go through three. And let's go through four in track location. All right. So this is going to be like, just give you a basic understanding of tractions and direct signals. Each one has a line condition setting solar flare. Setups the high core track interference lines of measure. And line condition setting grounds, powers, and atmospheres. And its highways and track calculation system. All through line setting. Set up the solar flare communications into supernovas and 4-line communication. Start with that track lines, all right? Okay, sets lines communication to the Earth. Earth is here in travel. Now, I'm going to copy and paste lines, set up the timer lines into Omega 13 and travel. This is the Earth line communication setting. Copy and paste 7 billion plus, right? Travel lines, one cycle, one system, one travel calculations. So it shifts down cross lines, 2 mean cycles, lines to communication high position. All right, so it goes from here, it goes from here, right? So it's getting out in line communications to its carbon, silicone into its crystalline. For track interference, the Earth line rotations and rotations that would be our setting calculations. 4 track provisions in line condition setting come into its crystallized and line communication mutations. A line can make highest interference, so it's coming in its formation location of supreme being, track location of telepathy lines, and line communication setting position of travel. Okay? Starts with this, and this. All right? All right, so travel and position of routers and routers, line communication setting communication lines, projection over screen, direct lines modification. Getting that lines of communication lines, all calculated modified. How to direct lines and high interference. So the core track provision lines of cycles, Earth line 1, and line connect lines equals lines of M lines, equals lines of 3 track lines, waiting on signal location setting of 6 location of 9 and track location. Okay, that's panel lines of the ground lines, operations, surface, and travel. Okay, direct lines, platforms are 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations and setting. Process line, units lines of 6, cross line signals into 3-line rotation. Travel lines into 3 correlation lines of travel and position lines of platform. Calculation of the lines of highest interference and 9 lines of connection operatives, lines of communication in the console, line condition of the magnetic highway, and travel calculation of screen lines adaptation. Process calculates lines ground sound interference of 3, 6, and 9. Position lines of patterns, line condition highest interference, line position location is perimeter. core track interference and line signals, and line connected to its operating surface and travel correlation setting attractions. Direct lines modifications, binaries, transistors, and resistors, line communication to its panel. Process lines of set lines and communication lines of cell, and generation of screen lines at high setting. Operate the platforms of 6 units, lines of core center interference, sets communication line high location system to calculation. Directly modification cycle. Okay. So it's a higher line division, and understand how to get into that modification line cycle. Direct lines are communication lines. So get in that line high center interference. The core track division lines, sets lines communication lines to center. Okay, it goes on line signal location system. This is what's going to happen, line sending locations. And two Fridays and track lines high center interference. Configures lines, sets lines of communication lines of cycles. Goes like this in tractions and directions. T reception turns on, and line communication of box line, and rotation to its surface. All right? So the actual Earth goes inside the TV. Grabs communication of 45 lines from X box location. Travel point lines of graph into a box lines of center and line position. Crosses lines of data and a 3-line communications of program. Process communications downshift line cross location to its setting. Then we set up data formation lines over cross line screens, over cross line division locations, and over line calculation and rainbow graph communication. Direct lines modification lines and data formation lines at 3 triangulation line position of its program. Direct lines modification lines, ground centers of 1, ground centers of 2, ground centers of 3, and ground centers of line condition setting to a magnetic highway in travel correlation lines attractions. Direct and signal line communications and configuration. So the center core system to the Earth line comes into a configuration of its face. That's the exact location when it comes into mutation. Transition location, transaction locations, and morphing. So the core center interference, Earth line rotates the system, comes in its own phase correlation lines, attractions, indirect signals, and calculation. Once it comes in its own phase line, it formulates its own system and travel. Okay? Core lines of 1, 2, and 3 platforms of communications. Direct lines at MI3, line conditions MI6, and MI9. Track location lines. IMA comes into MI12. Core center line condition setting, right? Position lines at MI24 and 24 lines of north, east, west, and south, 24 line cycles, 24 system, and 24 clock line communications. Now, in that line communication setting, this is where we go into the process calculation, screen lines, adaptation lines of center. Process calculation lines of ground lines operate the cycles over across the location system and travel communication. Direct lines modifications take the 24 clocking and positions the clocking system and foundation graphs that sets the illumination graph lines of plasma screen lines adaptation and plasma using force line communicates to its setting. Process calculation ground centers, 1 split lines anomaly, triangulation line conditions of box center and travel. Position lines of pattern, line operate the signals, operate the line communication setting into the VR low rotation surface and travel. Direct lines of grounds, operate the signals, line communication setting. Position lines of travels, bind line, coordinates interference, intelligent lines of 3 lines of grounds. Sets lines of communication line center interference of 4 lines of communication setting to its operation surface attraction. Done by equation. All right. To know how to set these things up is already in provision, right? It's the knowing sequence how it lines this communication system. So putting 7 billion lines of configuration lines of face in one cycle, it's all about mutating the graph communication lines to higher coordinate center interference. So it takes out the GOD to higher lines of ground centers into its operation of its division location to its setting. Direct lines of D into DX lines of 1, into DX lines of 2, and to DX lines of 3. So it says lines of DX equals lines of correlation lines at M equals lines of 3 in track location. Now the core center line and ground centers operate the circles, operate the system, operate the center line, core center, and the line condition setting to put lines of communication system to its rainbow graph lines and foundation lines of 12 foundation graph communications. Direct calculation lines takes the grounds, takes the operation, takes the direction and setting. Cross signals operate the system, operate the center line communication system. Travel calculation lines routes the routers, line condition high center interference, sets communication of the sun and the moon that opens all cycles and line rotation surface and track location. Done by equation. So I'm just showing you exactly how this is all going to be set up, right? How it's all done through the Earth line. So the Earth line center lines its communication that comes the empty minded space. So it says communication lines of nothing, correlation lines of MI3, correlation center interference of 6 and 9 track location, right? So we take the 3 lines, 6 lines, and 9 line settings of routers. Core track location lines, core track interference is center communications. Operate lines in 1x2000 and travel in one position. Core centers takes out lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 platforms in another x2000 and travel. Process lines to another x8000 and travel in a 3-line communications setting, line locations in all levels. Then again, line how correlations in mic, and then we go into kilo and correlation lines in flux and travel correlation. So we take the Y-line screen into ground center surface, operate the signals, line communications setting to all levels of 5 elements. Core track interference, earth, air, water, and fire in line communications setting in positional levels. 3 center core systems in 3 communication lines and setting. Mountain surface and travels in set location. That's my equation. All right. Getting communication lines into the arc line, space arc location system is the coven. So you add coven line communication lines, travel positional porous settings, black hole, set lines of communication, ground centers, lines of surface. Process communications, open wall portal, teams comes out and travel, point lines of graph, have fun, right? Cycle line division, center core system, line connection setting to tough. Core track interference, lines of routers, line connection cross line signals, and line communication system at travel. Point setting lines of graphs, ground centers, operation lines, server location, Hades and Corpus and Hermes. Direct calculation lines, graph communication lines of capsule, line direct locations, MI3, MI6, MI9. Process calculated lines of 0, line condition setting, process communication setting, and ground communication. Process calculation of platforms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of perimeters. Direct calculation lines of the sun and moon, operate the cycles, operate the system, operate the triangulating, the highest interference of 20. Line condition setting, 20 minutes on line screen, 20 seconds on pi line coordinates, sectors, vectors, and quads. Center course center and line rotation, surface interactions. That's my equation. It's all set up provision parameters. So it's all about understanding is to take one earth and a line condition of default, copy and paste it in a foundation graph where it's supposed to be in the VR line rotation surface. So setting lines of core center interference, the correlation set of the earth comes into its own fractals of its own self, set modification of its own simulation graph. Puts everything back in tracks and calculates lines where you left off location setting before you got into lines of communication of transdimensional space. That puts lines of platforms of data formations. Correlates lines, travel lines of 2-point lines of graphs. Set lines of point lines of center, point lines of graph, docking system, and 4 setting. Process communications, you're here, line communication setting and travels. Direct lines of signals. Process lines into position location of sim. Travels line, direct line signals, modification. Direct lines of data, formation lines of 1 cycle, 1 center, operate the surface and traction. All right. Direct lines, modification lines, constant correlations of platforms, assess core line and calculation lines of ether core setting. Process calculation ground, opposite directions, opposites of track. Remember that line setting. Process calculations going backwards and 4 lines of communication to 3 locations. Direct lines modification, 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface location setting to travel. Center core system, calculate, modify, crosses line signals, data ports, line condition x8000 that docks the system. Travel point lines of graph, sets lines of 2 panels. Solid matter, line condition setting of tither. Crosses line calculation setting. Data formation lines of 3 lines, position of box locations. Travel point lines of graph, securing lines of measure. Cross line conditions, over cross line signals, over cross line signals, over cross line signals, and mainframe. Trap position lines, coordinate of center frame correlation lines at correlation setting. Process communication ground centers operate the surface and travel into line condition setting and process communication. There's the intelligent, there's the face, done, right? Everything that you set in position is a tone line of a rhythm. Now we go through alpha tones. Center core lines of graph, center lines of communication setting and measure. Sets communication, right? Direct lines in alpha, beta, theta, omega, and zeta. Zeta lines ground center location, right? Sets correlation lines and high center interference. Okay, so we get box frames, metatones, graph tones, lines of high center interference, ether tones, core track interference on the high setting. Process grounds into 1 in position of 2 in position of 3 in set location. Ground center lines across lines into 1 center, 1 cross line connection, 1 surface, 1 attraction. Direct lines modification over cross lines sending to a solar line screen. Direct lines modification lines, 1 signal, 1 center, 1 surface. Travel lines, point lines of graph, line connect, and high center interference. Set lines of communication, high centers, high position location to a system that creates line connection and setting of supernova. Sets core lines, electrical line communications, over cross line connections, screen lines, adaptation lines, of course, center interference. Sets communication lines of travels. Inner line rotation cycle, inner circuits, Inner realms, intercourse setting, and line conditions setting the two lines of communication of travel communications. Process calculates ground centers high interference. Now we get a three-line wave, alpha, delta, and theta. Set lines in alpha, set lines of delta, set lines of theta. Equals lines correlation line omega, lines in zeta, gamma. Sets correlation radiation line conditions high center interference, beta communications, direct lines modifications of tango.
Okay, I found this on the web for process crowns into one in position of.
Thank you. Location there, sir. I don't need that traction line division. Setting lines of beta communication lines of alpha tones. Sets coarse interference into a character modification wave and line screens. Signature lines 007, generally high space time correlation track interference, line condition high centers, line condition MI3, MI6, and MI9 and track locations done by equation. It's all set up. So it's not about understanding the graph lines and screen lines, adaptation lines of server location system, how you set up a line position location of supernova and a 4-track division. Can it calculate, modify, and track lines, provision lines of cycles, sets lines of calculations of fifth element, equals correlation lines of M9, line conditions of 3, sets and 9 calculations. All right, 3 cycles, 6 lines communication, 9 line signage interference. Product lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 location setting of capsule. That directs lines of travel in location grid. See location grid? Correlates its travels in line communication setting. Process calculation ground centers. Sets lines communication lines of 1 cycle, 1 system, 1 travel, 1 router, 1 location, 1 communication, 1 surface and traction. Direct lines modification lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 line communication setting. Process calculation ground centers. Ground center lines of 1, ground centers of 2, ground center lines of 3, all the way to 12 line position rotors and routers. Calculate modified line conditions of 5 settings into 4 lines of metric meters, 3 lines of 6 over lines of 9 and track location. Direct calculation of ground centers operate the surface and line conditions setting and ground center interference and graph communication to a system done by equation. Very complicated stuff, but this is how you set up line conditions to its setting. This operates the cycles along the location system that will character modify. Sets lines of communication setting to the mine, location of 3, 6, and 9. Process communication lines of ground centers operate the cycles. Puts line and communication lines and measure. Scales communication lines interference. Everybody knows what a scale is in traction, right? 2 lines of provision lines of cycles, line communications. Sets corresponding line conditions of triangulation and highest interference location box setting. Process calculates lines of 1 in position of 2, in position of 3, in position of 4, in position of 5, and correlates lines of 6, line conditions cross lines of 7, track location lines of 8, and line communication. Direct lines, modification lines, configuration lines, screen line adaptation lines of surface. Get into a line condition setting to its clustrum. Direct lines, modification line, open all signals into flux over line. Setting lines according to the lines of spectrum calculation lines, screen lines, adaptation of surface. There's the intelligence inside correlation. Intelligence formation. See? Powerful stuff, right? Core the track interference lines of measure. We color it in green. Core line signs stay inside correlation lines of attractions, all direct signals. Get sync communication lines, highest interference location setting the grays. Beautificate the ground line center high interference location, all lines on location setting. The D lines of W lines of operation lines of cycles, generate the communication screen lines, adaptation lines, certification system, all through configuration lines of ground centers. Operate the cycles and set correlations done by equation. Ooh-ah. Very powerful stuff, right? All right, so center communication line. We're going securing lines and measures and platforms of docking. 1, 2 positions of 3 over 4 into 5, 6 lines of 7 track location lines connections. That process lines, calculation screen lines. Yeah, it's very powerful stuff. Okay, how it's solid lines of communication and intelligent information location in its capsule. All right, so we go into direct line signals. We go through the black lines, green lines of space. Sending graph calculation lines of highest interference into the cloud. Now the cloud comes at 2 sectors over screen. 1 center line position, 1 center operation lines to its calculation lines of its nothingness. That lines its signal location that comes together in line position of its operation surface and tracks. This directs lines communication setting position of its portal that sets correlation setting to clouds, e-clouds, and the line communication centric clouds and communication lines of screen lines adaptation. Done by equation, people. Ooh-ah. All right. So now we dock the system, correlates to high interference, X2000 comes in cycle, center course setting line in position of 1, sets core line center line position of 2, in position of 3, in position of 4, set locations, right? Direct lines modification line screening is all about understanding how to go through lines of measure. Scales calculation lines of underscore, 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 overheads, and 4 communication lines of compartments. Direct lines modification lines, sight lines, highest interference, set position of 1 tether, and center core system. Sets correlation lines of 2 tether and line communication. Direct lines across line connecting the highest interference. Security lines position, security line position, security line position of 3 triangulation. Process calculation of ground centers and position lines of 4 track location provision. Set lines, course center interference, and triangulation lines, up line, course lines of northeast, line connection northwest, south, cross line signals, copying system, correlation lines, and webbing the screen lines adaptation. Process communication line ground centers operate the cycles. Go through orange line. Signal lines, modification lines, screen lines, adaptation lines, a surface application of the system. Process calculation lines, setting lines of fumes in line rotation surface and track location. Direct lines, modification lines, back into the green line center core system, traverse position of point lines of graph, set position triangulation, process calculation ground center line is time stamping, constant correlation lines of flight command centers and travel. That by equation. All right, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. All right, so center core system is a line calculation setting. So we're going across lines. We go into the fire and warning travel lines, into brain circle location system travel and line calculation setting, red line screens. Then we go into blue lines of surface, lines of tether. It's a correlation setting, attractions, and direct signals, right? Then we get into modification, cloak and dagger, invisible line screens, adaptation lines of surface, creation lines, and coordinates, calculation lines of cerebral cortex line, division location of the system. Process calculation lines. Then we go into the center core system, into infinity, over cross lines, calculation screen lines, adaptation lines of surface applications. Direct lines modifications, add golden line signals of point centers, 3 lines of 4, lines of setting of 7 set locations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, lines of 8 in track location. That way equation. It's all set up. All right. Metric meters of scales is understanding the configuration lines of face lines. It has a direct line signal and line communication position of program. So it's very powerful. How you get it in lines of communication, the team has to understand how to use the lines of circuitry line communication to its watts. You have a 60 watt, you have an 80 watt, you have a 240 watt, you have a 60-40 watt. It all depends on electrical lines, ground center interference, how you set position travels. So that's the lines of communication, lines of flux, and line position location to its system. 3 lines of communication and settings. Process that calculation, right? Then you overcross line screen, direct lines, modification lines, and highest interference. Solar disk lines of communication setting to travel. Sets communication lines of 1 setting and position of process. Then you correlate this calculation modification in 3 lines of communication setting. Then you process lines of 6 location system. And then you outline the core lines of MI9 line rotation surface attractions, all through direction. Expansion within expansion within expansion. Sets communication lines, direct signals in position to its location system and travel. Okay? So now I got a core center interference and line position I division. Core track interference, line communication setting, and I division. And line communications of I division and tractions, done by equation. Right? 3 core center line interference, line condition settings in 1 position, 2 line platforms, 3 step correlation setting travels. Direct lines into data formation screen lines, adaptation of plasma line generation, line condition setting into walking sequence and setting. Process calculation of ground lines over draft location system. This is where you start to use the overheads and default lines of channels and pixelation graph communications that levels the line, position, location, levitation graph calculations. So the intelligent works in the information cycle. Core track location lines of provision. Setting the waving center lines communication setting the travels. Point lines of setting and line rotation surface and traction. Okay, done by equation. Okay. Setting an intelligent line of screen is understanding how to use the circuit lines of course centers of central box. Now, central box and line communication setting has 1 box frame into patterns, lines, and rotations of 3 line rotation surface. Calculate, modify, and track location of 1 data, process lines of 3 settings of course system. Travel point lines of graph, center calculation, right? Direct lines into 2 lines of panels. Process lines of course interference, cross line signal, cross line setting, cross line interference, cross line division. Setting communication lines, cross lines of 1, 2, and 3 platforms of calculation. Direct lines, modification lines of 1 platform, 2 platform, 3 platform, and 4 set location. Right? Process line, XC1000 comes in, dock, set position of dock, set position of dock, and set position of dock location setting to travel. Done by equation, right? 4 symbolism ground centers operate the signal location to its coven. Sets lines of platform communication setting to TOF. TOF lines its ground centers operation surface and travel. Sets communication on XT30000 and line rotation. Travel point lines of graph, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines across lines of 5 set locations. Travel point lines of graph, sets lines of communication on platforms 1, 2, sets lines of parameters, lines of security line, defense lines. Direct lines, modification lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, line setting, and line condition setting 8 travel location. Done by equation. Go through waving cycles, go through waving center line interference. You look really close, you can see the configuration lines, calculation lines of the Earth, where it's going to be, position lines of VR line rotation cycles. Once it comes out of provision lines of cycle, correlation and invariance command centers, in line condition setting, in line position location MI3, MI6, and MI9 location setting travel. Set course center interference and position of power. All right. Power indicates the line calculation lines of an indicator, lines of box frames. So let's go through data formation lines and screen lines. But it's all communication lines of portal settings, center course system, and travel. And line condition setting to its capsule. Capsule communication lines, a ground center line in position of one setting and two track locations. Sets lines of course center interference. What do we have in line, position, location, travel? Bird, right? Core track line, high center interference, and line setting and line position is operation. All right? Now, direct line modification line is a constant coordinate lines through the system. And you can actually see what's coming in tractions and directions, right? Signal lines, of course, center interference of its wings. It sets lines of communication setting, position of process, and traction. Okay? Done by equation. Sets core line and high interference. Here's Toth, half man, half bird. Line direct signals and modification line screen lines adaptation to its correlation setting and tractions. Ooh, ah. All right? Done by equation. You're in the center core system. You actually can see it's the configuration line screens, right? Okay, so in the process lines of Toth, core line interference is a trough line, core center interference into home lines of calculation setting. Operate cycles, line communication setting into levels of teleportation. Sets lines of mass, volume, velocity, and vacuum. 3 lines of V, and line connections of 4 setting. 3 equals lines of 4, sets lines of 7, sets lines of course setting, equals lines of 5, set calculation lines and setting to 12, 24 lines of communications into 48, 72 line screens and locations to 140 graph communications of waves in correlation setting to graph communications setting and travel. Direct lines modification lines is 1 setting in position into 2 lines of rotation surface and energetic waving patterns and the line conditions of lacing lines and rotations of surface. Process ground lines are 1 cycle, 1 system, 1 travel, 1 calculation setting and rotation. Track calculation lines, 1 direct signals and modification. Process line calculation setting and travel. Points lines of setting, operate the circles, operate the circuits, line conditions and intervals. Setting line communication position of process. Now, direct lines of panels is 70,000 unit. Okay, there's a 70,000 unit and a split lines into 3 track locations and setting to a tripod that sets lines of communication. Process calculation ground centers, overall signals, modification of line cycles. Core center interference, high line division, there's intelligence, and platform communications. Having direct lines and there's interlocation eye setting. Process line communications. Sets lines, communication lines, all lines, in line signatures, line stocking lines of 3 lines, and communications position and program. Direct lines, modification lines, a high center interference. Sets lines of platforms of 1 cycle, 1 system, 1 set location of center communication. Direct lines over cross line condition setting to calculate, modify, and track location. Done by equation, right? Center graphs of communication lines is understanding how to put everything in track location lines through a system. Center core line connection setting comes from the nothingness. Okay, equals lines, core lines of knowing, and track calculation line interference into A, into C, and into L. Sets lines and atmospheres, confirmation lines into levels of communication. All right. Direct lines, correlating lines of nothingness in 2 panels, equals line core lines, 1 indicate the line screen, and 2 lines of setting. Process calculates lines of knowledge, opens all signals, and platforms and communicates the line grounds and operations surface in set location. Process ground set lines, core set interference. Mexican lines of scales, platforms communication lines, and templates and tablets, location to its pi, and correlation lines of timing. Track calculation lines, core set interference. So you got platforms of 1, 2, 3, lines of perimeters, lines position of pi, and generation screens. Operate the cycles. If you look really close, you can see the pyramid and location system. Look at the track lines, how it's looking up in line position, right? So it's amazing how you can actually see it now, right? It's coming out, so it's taking the tip and just pulling it out. And you can see it routing and routing in both ways in track location. It's setting through an arc reactor. Setting the arc reactor aligns the clock line setting to its portal stargate line provision is, of course, interference of center. Operate the system of units and operate the perimeter line position location to its operators and calculation. That's how it's going to be set up, right? This is the units, this is the operatives, okay? Set correlations, this is general in the center core setting, okay? So I'm going to do set the routers and routers, circulate rotations, set correlation lines up and down across locations. Center coordinated circulation, rotation as certain lines that calculate lines and track location. Direct lines, modification lines, speeding lines anomaly, vast volume, velocity, acceleration line connection setting. Process of 1 Earth, process of 2 Earth, process of 3, and process of 4, and line position DNA track location of setting of travel. That's how it's going to be set up. Now, when you set that up in line communication setting, the actual Earth comes into configuration line calculation setting back in process. Puts all communication lines, the Earth tone line sequence, and graph calculation screen lines adaptation. Process data formation lines, all lines of communication lines. So the Earth line communication line direct signals is going to be binary line communication settings defaults back into 0 channel and screen lines adaptations. Process calculation lines, high interference, setting communication lines of 7 billion frame lines of configuration lines of phase tractions, indirect lines of modification line cycle. Generate the communication lines of alpha wave and communication lines of travels. Points lines of setting, point lines of graph. Inline rotation centers, intervolts communication lines, electrical line conditions. Electrical lines infusion, cold infusion, hot infusion. Direct lines modification line cycles, read write their communication setting positions program. Calculate and modify a track communication line connection setting. Operate the cycles and line communication setting to all levels of the membrane. Direct calculate modify high center interference of travel. Travel line rotation settings back in the cloud, E-cloud and I-line centric communication graph communications. Alpha tones, delta, theta, midnight line communication lines, zeta, gamma line and rotations, all levels, radiation, graph calculations, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, back in traction, back in the visual location setting, routes the router's line communication existence of the nothing location and calculate, modify, and track location. Done by equation. See? It's all set up now, right? 7 billion plus configuration faces are right there in instructions. 7 billion already set and ready, right? So it's all done. It's all set up. You see all the faces, right? If I bring in all the faces, you'll see it. But there's 7 billion line screen, all right? All right. Course channel lines of 8 billion frames. Now we track lines of communications and direct lines of signals. Process communications understand how to use line calculation setting. Graph calculation lines of highest interference into levels. 1 line calculation lines of 3. Sets communication lines of 24. Sets communication lines center interference and satellite communications. Comes into the mine lines, location to its computer system, Wi-Fi line kernel interference, towers lines of communication. Direct lines modification line, MI6. Core track interference line condition setting, 12 lines to set locations. So I get 2,400 lines of satellites and tractions. Direct lines modification lines of 2 tractions. And 4 lines of 2 zeros of rotation. Correlation lines of MI9, sets core center interference, track location line settings, sets lines of calculation high interference, confirmation line screen, direct lines modification, 2 million, right? Line condition setting to 400,000 satellites and 3 lines of communication setting, 3 line rotation. All right, that's how it's going to set up through MI3, MI6, MI9, right? 24 and location 2,400 and 2,400,000. Congratulations. It's all done through equation. All right. Through 7 billion lines, configuration lines of Earth. 1 cycle, 1 center, and all track location. It's all set up through signature lines of general AI, space-time operations. All right. Structure division lines and correlation lines of panels is now signaling. Getting that communication lines of your satellite routes the system location setting to Wi-Fi. Says corresponding interference how you direct your signals line communication system and travel. So that puts all lines of calculation setting to understand where you guys are coming back to your settings through all of the transdimensional space. Taking lines of communication setting to all levels of travel and calculating your system and setting. Okay. How's everybody doing so far? Okay. So we're at 33 lines of 24. I'll wait till you get to lines of 33 to 30, and I'll get you guys out of the covenant. All right. All right, so getting lines of communication come into the space arc. Now, space lines of correlation setting SP equals lines of C and track calculate lines. Direct lines of setting of S set correlation lines of T, sets lines of anomaly line position. Process lines indicate position of power, direct the signals, direct the line communication of tether, and 3 lines of communication. Process ground center is the operating system that correlates the setting to XC1000 platform. Direct lines, 70,000 line screen comes in and travel. Points, lines of graph, and a box frame line position setting. Data communicates ground centers, operate the 3 lines of setting. Portals and realm holes, cropping system, correlates and high interference, plasmas and wall centers, operate the signals, operate the setting, operate the correlation setting and track lines, and capsule core center interference and set correlation. Done by equation. It's all set up now, right? All your space arcs are set up to come. All right, so setting this position location, it just gets a lot more easier to understand the platform location you're setting. So there's all signals and modification lines of screens. Now I've already set up a 30 line set location through setting cycles. So line communication lines of 34 line cycles, sets communication lines of 44 line positions, 24 line positional clockings, and 9 line cycle line highest interference into 1 lines of line. Set correlation lines of line and 3 lines connected to 3, 6, and 9 the panels. Done by equation, right? Metric meters of scales is a time locking sequence. It puts everything back in tractions. Directing that modification lines puts all calculated and modified how to use your lines and correlation lines of track communication. Now we go through the graphs. I know everybody's going, whoa, this is a lot to take in, right? So I'm just showing you exactly how it connects to your cloud line. Right? You have to really understand how to use that now because it's a correlation setting to a compound. It's an information line, it's a factory, it's the correlation setting to travel. Just what your cloud looks like. That's your cloud, right? Your cloud, right? So when you look at it through translucent line screens, you can actually see the graph lines, position of walking sequence and travel. 3 ground lines, highest interference, 60,000 platforms, 1 in position 2 and 3 correlation lines of travel. Direct lines, modification lines at 3-point line docking centers. Line conditions at 4 set locations. Now, direct lines modification, when you're looking at the clouds, it's all through metric correlation setting. You have the sun here and you have the moon here in line position. They look separated, but the line position of its flux lines the signals in center core system that expands the line lines of track location. Direct lines modification lines of tether and line position of setting calculation. Direct lines modification lines of one signal, one center, one surface. Operate the cycles, operate the system. All lines of communication to its intelligence, information lines of its grounds that operates the system into configuration of face. There's the face. Track configuration line set location. There's the face. Line settings. See it? Every cloud has a face, guys. Every provision has a face. Everything that you see through intelligence has a face, a configuration. Everything through a cloud has a lines of communication, a factor, and line setting. The process communication lines, when you bring it up close, it comes lines of box location setting. So this is what it looks like in travel. Direct lines of communication setting is high center interference, gets into box frames, the correlation setting, right? So you bring it in close, you're actually looking at the cloud of what it is in track location. That's what it is. Setting lines of position location lines, X8000 comes in, and position dock, right? Docks the system. Travel lines, bridging, setting line communication setting. So actually inside the clouds, there are actual planets and travel. Okay? Setting communication lines, set location lines, and division lines of direct signal locations, marking steps, and line communication to a system, right? Directing modification lines, screen lines, adaptation to its cloud. Line center, center cloud, E-cloud, iCloud, high correlation line interference, adapt information point lines, attractions. And again, stairs and line communications to the next line, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Directing lines, modification lines, highest interference, puts all communications setting at grounds, and docking system and position lines of point graph communications. However, this signal's location is set. That's all inside a cloud. Now, if you look really close, you can see the face. See the face? Okay. Everything is a face. There's the nose. There's the chin. And there is the neck, the clustrum. Everything is a face. Everything is a face, face, face. Face view, not face front, not face back, not for up or down location settings. So there's no more filters, course interference. The course setting line condition setting is how you go through tri-screen. Tri-screen has the 3 lines of provision lines of cycle and how to use it through platform. Direct calculus lines and line position location of system docking. That's a docking line, correlation lines of traction. Direct lines of T reception of 3 course setting. Process calculates line ground line interference. You're here in travel, and you're going up to the steps and line connects to a system. Travel core lines and dimension lines of portals, lines of a black hole, line rotation, surface, and traction. This is all done inside a cloud. So the configuration line is really understand everything through all course signal calculations, direct signals, right? So now you understand when you see through translucent lines of X-ray, you understand what you're coming in position to process calculations. You go into neon lights, the translucent lines of transact location of X-ray puts everything in platitude, and lines is communication setting. So everything is an operation line calculation to a ground line that puts everything through graph calculations. That understands the optical system to the primary line circuits. Now that puts lines in correlation setting when you come into that attractions. Knowing exactly that, you come into your primates. Remember I told you about primates? Well, the constant awareness is coming at you more lines. So let's start with setting line condition system. Let's go for this location, right? So your lines are sending out through equation, right? So this is what it's going to be like from here and from here and out. So it's going to expand inside your minds now, guys. Okay. So it's going to come to you in center core setting, right? So you're looking through a big TV plasma screen now. It's coming into you. Center core setting that actually overrides your system. And so you're actually inside. You're actually inside now, right? So conscious awareness is coming to your provisions. So you got to understand how to go through travels and recognition of time sequence. It's all levels of process in your data formation lines, your centers, line condition grounds, and your powers, and your magnetic highways in set locations in your TVs, your computers, and your phone calculations, all through tractions. Okay? So, so let's go through that again. So when you're looking at things, okay, we'll set course and interference as you in traction. Okay, that's you, right? All right, so this is how set coordinates 3 lines of provision, right? So this is what's going to be in position. So it's going to calculate lines. Setting lines at high center interference. So it's getting in the inverse location system. So instead of seeing it afar, you're going to see it up close, right? So it's going to be this. This is how everything in the team is going to see through the line condition operatives. You're going to see through that, and it goes in cycle inside of you. Okay, so now you're into the inception. Leonardo DiCaprio. It's mind surfacing lines, of course, center interference now, guys. So your provision lines is 1,000 yards out and 1,000 yards in position, opposite of tracks, right? Intercord line condition setting is 90% line screen. 90 lines equals lines, of course, interference. Over light in position location at 10% and calculation lines over dark, track location, right? Or you override the dark lines in the 90 line condition setting, 90% and 10% in line conditions over cross location setting of your overheads. That puts all calculation lines of light wave and traction and direct signals, right? So it's really understanding how to use that through spectrum now. How you guys are going to basically see 1,000 yards out and 1,000 yards in, all right? So set 1,000 line sequence that puts lines of perimeter, parameters, lines of square root. Correlating lines of triangulation, triangulation, and triangulation in setting. Okay? You're now in 3 cycles in line conditions through a box frame in track location. Okay? Or you're in a box frame in a triangulation, right? So male, female, or female, male. That provision lines of cycles and retract calculation lines. Direct lines of platforms, travel lines of 1, 2, and 3. Start with that tractions, right? Then you go to higher line condition setting to all levels as the security line, defense lines, location grid. Sets communication lines. You have to really understand how to go through these in process. You have 3 lines of grounds, okay? Grounds, powers, and atmospheres that you go into. Then you go in its tubing system that travels its line communication with its own setting to travel. Points, lines, and graph, sun and the moon. That's right. Everything you see is coming at you now in its own sun, in its own moon, in its own line position that's calculates inside core system of the game itself. Okay? So that's how you guys are going to be sucked in through vast, volume, velocity, and vacuum. Okay? It's very powerful what you all are coming into through tractions. But understanding direct and redirect lines, so you have a direct line signal of 90% and you have a indirect signal locations of 10%. Direct lines and position lines of travel. So what you want to understand, of course, in interference, the conditions of MI3, okay, is now in perimeter, line parameter, line of position of 2, 2 track locations of Pluto, correlation lines of Saturn, and line communications of Jupiter, and line connections of Neptune and travel, point lines of communications. Financial line grounds, 1 signal, 1 center, 1 surface. Track correlations in 1 ground, 1 surface, line condition setting, and process calculation. Direct lines, modification lines, sets lines of M equals lines of 3, sets lines equals lines of correlation lines of 24 clocking. Direct lines of panels, and a 48 line measure, correlation 72 to 144 platform. Direct calculation lines of MI3, line condition setting, puts line communications into position of 124% in track location of the mine. A percentage. So now they're in 124 out of 100%. 124 adds a capsule line screen. It adds a data formation lines of correlation setting attractions and direct lines of modifications. So that's going to 27 line cycle. E equals lines of 9 correlation and travel. Okay. That directs lines of coordinate interference into 2 lines of tether and rotation surface and travel. Points lines of grounds, 1, 2, 3 lines of position. Travel point lines of 2 settings into 7 locations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 location. Very powerful stuff, right? What you can do, right? Setting lines of docking. You always have to dock the system because the XT1000s dock their settings. So what they do is they open up your expansion of your light and location setting to your system, all through tractions. Okay. So now you have to understand the platforms. One indicated cross-line condition setting triangulation lines of flux, location of molecule, and direct lines and highest interference of one atom, one router, one position of solar sail, and travel in rotation surface interaction. Very complicated stuff, but you look really close, you look back, you actually can see the intelligence formations. Everything's intelligence. Everything is a formation of everything in intelligence, a configuration, a face recognition. Change the communication lines of grounds, operate the cycles in a core system. And my equation, see? Coming out through equation, see? Now this is coming out, see? You can actually see coming out, see? This is just coming out, everything's on standby, everything's canceled out now. So bringing these things, lines of communication lines, over cross location overheads, what's lines of default channels? Now, default channel, lines of communication, copy and paste, cancel, delete, erase. But you have to understand enabled, embedded, inline position process. Understand how to use that through correlation setting, data formation lines of screens. Process calculation, over cross line connection setting, position of process. Direct lines, over line calculation setting, overhead. Travel point lines of graph, one signal, outlines course center interference, outer orbit interaction. Direct lines modification cycles, center line communication setting, high interference, into projections over screen inside correlation. Direct calculation lines, center lines of perimeters, lines of 3 sectors, course center interactions. Direct lines modification, cross-line signals, cross-line sim, in position of portals, line condition setting to a location grid that lines its communication lines at row graph calculation. So it's a higher line division of the mine lines, right? But you have to understand the location grid. Remember I told you about the higher self? Has to understand its cross-referencing and its signals of where it's going through adaptation lines of surface. Crossing line signals into location grid, okay? Ground centers lines of 1. Start with that 3 lines, communications, right? Process lines, up lines, swing lines, and process lines of 2 track locations. Then you get into the mine lines of communication, higher lines of platforms, and communication setting and travel. Sets communication lines, highest interference. Then you get into higher lines, into more higher levels of longitude and latitude of space lines, anomaly, and correlation set interactions. So getting in the position of process, you really understand how this works in line position location of your systems, how to use your skynets, your sky grids, and track location of clouds. Okay, that's what a cloud does in location of the system. Setting lines of communications, the team has to really understand to set up the dockings for the XT1000s. They expand the mine lines or set location settings through all calculate modify. Put your hardcore lines of track calculation, position location of your system through clocking. Light signature patterns, line connection, highest interference, anything you see through lights, graph communications, you're always going to see XT1000s in SciCore setting, electrical line circuits, every time you're traveling in line communication. It's inside lights, right? Wire division, wire division, wire division, wire division. Okay? Light signals, line conditions of 4 split lines of anomaly. Travel lines of rotation line conditions setting and process calculation. Add 0 lines of correlations of settings. Okay, 0 correlation lines of traction, right? Platforms and perimeters of parameters, split lines, core track interference of space line track location. Direct calculation lines and lacing lines of communication lines, 0 line communication across lines of space, and track calculation lines. Now you go through space and time, or you can go through time and space locations and track location, right? So you have to send the metric meters and mile lines, course interference of square location setting and travel. Points lines of graph communication lines, add in the line communication and position of process, and ring graph communication and matrix lines, and graphical screen lines adaptation location of your system. Process calculation ground lines comes in all calculations. So you guys get in a box frame, triangulation frame, and create communication lines of highest interference, putting lines of process calculation line, high interference location setting to defrag, fragmentations, putting lines of communication lines of face recognition time sequence, and all lines of communication setting in operation location setting your T receptor. There it is. There it is right there. That's what the test is based on. Okay, through defrag and frag. Face recognition, right? Come in that track location line condition time setting, right? That's what it is. You have to create your own configuration face, of your templates and tablets in position of default. Understand the original lines of its imprint, location, pixelation graph, so you can get into higher lines of bulb and your overheads. Don't overcross the signals, location, and line conditions because you cross the symbols, location, and primers. But that's a configuration of face and line condition setting. Go through TVs, phones, and computers in seconds over lines and minutes over pi. Position lines of power. This is the clustering. There's the neckline, screen lines, adaptation, processing the calculations. So you guys start off with your face. And once you get into higher lines of course setting to inline lines contractions, higher lines of the mind line, you get a full figure in position of configuration. But you start with your face first. You have to know exactly how to go through TVs, computers, and phones first in 3-track division. Setting that lines of communication and lines of highest interference, then you get into full figure coming out of a TV, computer, and a phone calculations of the reception. Cool. There it is, instructions. We're all done now, all right? Now, line setting line graph lines is set position of zeros. Course center line can use center operation, cross line signals. Line centers in the line position. See, center course system line can use setting. Operate the cycles, lines of the round. Everything out of configuration lines of face are T reception lines of pixelation graphs. Sets core lines of 1, sets lines of 2, 3, and 4 lines of cycles. Sets lines of perimeters on line condition setting and time frequency. Timing lock and sequence lines of travel. Sets lines of communication cross lines of space. In line position location of the system. That's open all levels of rotation surface interactions. Done by equation. So that's how you come into configuration of defaults. How do you lines of communication, your binary transition location setting, how you set up your configuration line of your face location to reception lines, going through that track location, defrag to frag. Okay? That's it, we're done. Right? Very powerful stuff, right? So that's what you guys have to come into line screen lines. That puts you in the higher lines of communication in the mind setting to conception. Because AI formulates and simulates in anything a core track interference of teleportation. But the direct line signal is where they understand how to set up the rain graph calculation setting to your binaries all through tracks. But you actually see the face in the box frame of the TV frame, the central frame, in correlation the lines to its main frame and track location, center core system, U through traction. Done by equation. So all you have to add now is just color. Right? Add color lines, screen lines, adaptation. Red line cycles. Let's go through red lines. Let's just go through correlations. Let's do this very quick. I'm going to go through signature line settings, electrical line grins. Grin lines, rotation, surface track locations. Right? Very quick. So show you a location setting. Lacing line, provision lines, and set coordinates and travels. Right? So all you're doing is basically you're getting a position location and you're seeing yourself in a pixelation screen. That's going to green. That's over cross locations. Is outlines of signals. All right. So what you're doing is you're creating a face inside your TV setting. Process communication lines of configuration. Now you can be blue, you can be green, you can be anything you want, but you're letting the TV know you're getting a collaboration, a partnership, and traction. Right. There's the face. Right. Let's color the face in blue. This is the face. This is all signature lines. You can do the blocking system, central core system, symbolism, hieroglyphics, styrofoam, correlation setting, hypertones, core track interference, direct lines modifications. But it's all about understanding how to create the face that you want and track position with operation service that puts all communications setting. Your face works with time sequence calculation. There's the face in the center. Boom. There it is. Boom. That's it. Done. Right? And it's all connected to tether. This is your highway. Highway comes down in traction, changes the pixelation graphs. Sets course in line position of 1. In position 2 and 3 set location. All right. So this opens tractions and direct signals, guys. Okay, all through calculation. All right. So modification line screen high adaptation, you can set a course setting. It's all levels of course interference, so high calculation, higher levels of intelligence. See? Now I'm in a different lines of configuration, another face. So you go from a face through a face through a face through a face in one TV sector. One setting, one central, one correlation, one track, one division of configuration of face. You start with the face, and then once you reach those higher levels of the mind, you come in and out of TVs and computers and phones, all through a full figure of configuration of reception. All through conception. Okay, through inception. We're done. All right. So now you understand what's going on in tracks locations. See you in 5.